In the sweltering midday heat, on a quiet road in the outskirts of New York, a 14-year-old black girl, Amara Collins, stopped beside a smoking Mustang GT. She looked unremarkable, a wrinkled uniform, an old backpack, and neatly tied curly hair. But she, Amara Collins, was the one brave enough to approach and help a frustrated Manhattan millionaire whose fancy car wouldn't start. The man was Christopher Reynolds, the only son of one of the most powerful real estate families in the United States. With a dismissive look, he told her to get away because this isn't some cheap toy. What he didn't know was that this act of disdain would be the one that brought his entire family empire down. Just a few minutes later, Chris stood frozen. Not because the girl fixed the car, but because of the red ruby ring on her finger, a secret memento hidden from the world, now resting on the hand of an unknown black girl in the middle of a dusty dirt road. That ring wasn't just a memory. It was evidence. A sharp blade cutting through the glamorous facade his family had built with lies, manipulation, and the blood of children they viewed as experimental property. And what Chris didn't know, she wasn't just there to fix a car. She was there to tear down an empire. Do you believe that sometimes the ones who are seen as small and invisible are actually the biggest storm the powerful have ever faced? The late afternoon sun stretched across the desolate country road in upstate New York, casting a golden hue on the earth, barren trees, and rows of decaying wooden fences. Amara Collins, a 14-year-old black girl, a ninth grader, was slowly walking home after a long day at high school. Each step she took echoed softly on the gravel ground, her faded backpack swaying on her shoulder, so old that the straps were frayed, but still neat and orderly. Inside, besides her books, was a small mechanic's toolkit, carefully wrapped in an old piece of cloth, a precious gift from her Uncle Matthew, the only family she had left, given to her last year. He was the only mechanic in town, a kind black man with oil-stained hands, but a heart always shining. He was the one who taught Amara how to listen to an engine like one would listen to a heartbeat, and encouraged her to never be ashamed of dirty hands if they came from knowledge and effort. Amara wasn't remarkable at school. With her dark skin, curly hair pulled back into a small bun, and her never-new uniform, she was often ignored. But that never stopped her. Beneath her quiet exterior was a sharp mind, and the resilience shaped by growing up in hardship. She didn't just excel in her studies, but also had a knack for listening, both to people and machines. As Amara was about to turn onto the dirt road leading to the poor neighborhood, she stopped. A sleek black Mustang GT, a high-end sports car, was parked at the side of the road. Its hood popped open, releasing a light wisp of smoke from the engine. Next to it was a well-dressed white man in an Italian suit, his shiny leather shoes gleaming like mirrors. He paced back and forth, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his face tense and frustrated. "I don't care what the meeting is." His voice rang out sharply, clear even though the wind had started picking up. "I'm stuck on County Road 16 with a dead car, and no mechanic will come for 2 hours. Ridiculous." Amara stood still at a respectful distance, not too close to seem rude, but close enough to observe the car. She immediately recognized the model, a new Mustang GT with a twin-turbo cooling system, which could be quite sensitive if not handled properly. The steam rising from the front of the car wasn't smoke from a fire. It was a clear sign of an issue with the cooling system. The man hung up, shoved the phone into his pocket, and bent over the engine as if glaring at it would make it restart. But of course the car didn't respond, other than a soft creak of metal cooling down. Amara furrowed her brow, instinct kicking in. Uncle Matthew had always told her, "If you see someone struggling with a car and you know how to help, don't wait for permission. Knowing and not acting is a waste." She took a deep breath, tightened her backpack straps, then walked up calmly, her voice steady but clear. "Sir, your car seems to be leaking water down there." The man looked up, initially surprised, then skeptical. Here stood a black schoolgirl, her white shirt faded, sneakers worn down at the heels, with no fear in her expression. He squinted. "It's nothing," he said dismissively. "Just a small issue. You should head home. It's getting late." Amara didn't back down. She shrugged lightly. "I know a bit about cars. Would you like me to take a look?" The man chuckled, not so much in contempt, but clearly unconvinced. "This is a high-end sports car, kid. It's complicated, not something anyone should just mess with." Amara remained calm, opening her backpack and pulling out her small toolkit, her gaze sweeping over the engine compartment. Her eyes narrowed, focused, as if every detail was speaking to her. A gust of wind swept across the field, but it didn't shake the girl standing firm beside the car. The man, who she would later learn was Ethan Walker, a renowned real estate tycoon from New York, stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the girl who not only wasn't afraid, but seemed to know exactly what she was doing, more so than the technicians he had ever hired. And that was the moment everything began to change. The man standing before Amara, dressed in a sharp Italian suit and a gleaming Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, was no stranger to the financial elite of Manhattan. Christopher "Chris" Reynolds, 35, was one of New York's most renowned real estate moguls, the CEO of Reynolds Development Group, owner of dozens of commercial skyscrapers along Fifth Avenue and in Upper Manhattan. In the press, Chris was the ideal image, young, handsome, and successful. But to those who had worked closely with him, the name carried a chilling aura, cold, controlling, and trusting no one but himself. Yet, in this very moment, on a deserted country road, Chris, the god of investment, was flustered by a stalled engine and a 14-year-old black schoolgirl whom he had just told to head home. Amara stepped a little closer, her eyes quickly scanning the engine in front. "Is your car having trouble, sir?" she asked, her tone gentle, as if there was nothing intimidating about the situation. Chris furrowed his brow, studying her for a long moment. In his mind, hundreds of thoughts raced. Could this be a joke? What could a country girl possibly know about a Mustang GT? "You should go home," he replied, his voice firm, though not entirely curt. "This is a high-end car, not a toy." Amara didn't respond the way he expected. No hesitation, no shame. She simply bent down, leaned over the front of the car, glanced at it, then looked up, speaking calmly. "It's leaking coolant. Can't you smell the syrupy odor?" Chris froze. What smell?" He immediately bent down, following the direction she indicated. Beneath the car, a small light blue puddle was clearly forming, dripping steadily from the radiator hose. A sweet, faintly acrid smell, glycol, the coolant, lingered in the air. Chris stood up straight, taken aback. Not because of the puddle, but because of how quickly this girl had spotted it. How did you know?" he asked, his voice softening for the first time. Amara shrugged, pulling out a roll of duct tape and a sealing kit, the kind her Uncle Matthew always made her carry, in case of emergencies. "I learned it from Uncle Matthew. He fixes cars at the garage near our house," she said, her hands never stopping. "I can't fix it completely, but I can help you get to the nearest town if you want." Chris simply stood and watched. The girl bent over, skillfully detaching the leaking hose, wiping the area with a small cloth from her bag, then using the sealant and tape to patch it up. Every motion was natural, quick, efficient, as if this wasn't her first time doing it but her 100th. The atmosphere between them shifted. Chris, who always dismissed anything unprofessional, suddenly saw this girl not as a child, but as someone with sharp eyes, a steady mind, and above all, an unspoken pride that didn't need to be voiced. "What's your name?" he asked for the first time, his voice carrying a clear note of respect. Amara Collins," she replied, wiping her hands on a cloth, offering a small smile. "And you?" Chris hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to reveal his true identity, not out of fear, but because he didn't know why he hesitated. Chris Reynolds." Amara nodded, showing no sign of being impressed. But when their hands shook, Chris suddenly noticed a red gleam from her small hand. A ring. It was an old ring, set with a dark red ruby, clearly too large for Amara's hand, its band tightly wrapped with black thread to make it fit. In that fleeting moment, the sunlight passed through the stone, casting a red glow on his face, like a memory that had never faded. Chris stood still. There was something very familiar about it, so familiar that his chest tightened, as if pulled back into the past. "That ring," he murmured. Who does it belong to?" Amara looked down at the ring, her voice suddenly softening with a hint of sadness. "It was my mother's. She said it was a symbol of a very important promise. She passed away last year." Chris swallowed, his heart pounding. He couldn't explain it right away, but the stone, the ring, the light, all of it stirred a part of his memory that had been buried for over 15 years. And he knew this moment wasn't just a random encounter. It was the beginning of something far deeper and more dangerous. Chris stood frozen, his hand still tingling from the handshake moments ago. A small, thin hand, but firm, strangely honest. Amara, with her petite frame and sun-kissed face, knelt beside the Mustang GT as if she were the only one with the authority to handle it. In the orange-hued afternoon light, her natural curly hair was tied neatly at the back of her head, revealing a full forehead and eyes as bright as stars. Her white school uniform shirt, now faded, was pressed neatly, and every movement Amara made, from opening her tools, inspecting the engine, to wrapping the tape around the leak with precision, demonstrated the devotion of someone who truly loved the craft. There was nothing rushed or boastful about it. Chris sat back in the car seat, staring through the windshield, watching the girl. He tried to calm the rising emotions inside him, not because of the car, but because of the ring. "No way," he muttered. "It can't be her." Amara stood up after finishing the sealant patch. She turned back to her backpack, pulled out a bottle of water, opened the radiator cap, and carefully poured the liquid, drop by drop. The engine now just needed to cool down before attempting to restart. "You should let an adult do this," Chris said, but this time his voice was no longer arrogant. It was a resigned sigh. Amara looked at him, shrugged slightly. "I don't see anyone else here." Her response made Chris chuckle, but it was a reluctant laugh, tinged with a hint of bitterness. He was used to people bowing to money, employees always trying to please him, and the polished lies at contract signings. But standing before him now was a 14-year-old schoolgirl, not afraid of him, needing nothing from him, simply wanting to help. "Where did you learn all this?" Chris asked, for the first time allowing himself to be genuinely curious. "From Uncle Matthew. He works at the garage down the street. Every Saturday afternoon, he lets me tinker with old engines. If I don't learn how to fix them, I'll be stuck waiting for hours on the side of the road." Chris nodded lightly. In his mind, distant memories flooded back. Charity trips, those build a school for poor children ceremonies he'd been taken to as a teenager. But he had never really encountered a child like Amara. A girl from a different world, full of determination, self-respect, and no need for pity. And then his gaze shifted back to the ring. The ruby ring. A ring he had once held 15 years ago. It wasn't a mass-produced item, but a unique design. A deep red ruby set in gold, intricately carved into a twisting vine shape, forming the letter O when viewed from the side. Chris quietly asked, "That ring, who did your mother get it from?" Amara hesitated. Her face darkened like a cloud passing across the sunlit sky. "My mom never said exactly. She just said it was a promise from someone special. They told her to keep it, and that one day I'd understand why." Chris felt as though his heart had been squeezed. The ruby, the promise, her mother. All the pieces began to fit together like a nightmare he thought had been buried forever, under piles of real estate files, under the billions of dollars tied to new projects rising where there once stood an old orphanage, Sunshine Children's Home, where he had promised to return, where he had left a promise etched into this very ring and walked away without ever keeping it. Chris jumped up suddenly, his heart racing. He needed to confirm. He needed to be sure. What's your name? Your last name?" he asked, trying to maintain his calm. "Amara Collins," she answered. "I have Uncle Matthew's last name. He raised me after my mom passed away." "Collins?" Chris took a step back, as if struck by an invisible punch. Collins, he remembered. In old records, there had been a woman named Sarah Collins, who had worked as a nurse at Sunshine. She had suddenly withdrawn her files and disappeared with a little girl named Lily. He looked back at the ring, then at Amara. No, Lily. In the distance, the engine hummed with a smooth start as Amara pressed the ignition button. The Mustang GT came back to life, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But Chris no longer cared about that sound, because at that moment his heart had realized the terrifying truth. The girl standing before him was Lily Reynolds, the child he had once promised to come back for, before everything was swept away by power, money, and dark family secrets. And more importantly, if he had found her, then surely his father, Richard Reynolds, also knew. And that was dangerous, deadly. Chris gently grasped Amara's hand, the sensation of the cold ring pressing against his palm causing his heart to skip a beat. A deep red ruby, gleaming in the setting sun, was tied with a thin thread around her finger, a finger still bearing the softness of youth but already carrying more weight than it should. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure as he asked again, his eyes fixed on the gemstone. "That ring? It's from your mother?" Amara nodded slightly, her voice deepening like a late wind. "My mom passed away a year ago. Before she left, she gave me this ring and said that it was a promise from someone very special, someone she trusted more than anyone else." She looked up, her dark eyes as deep as an ancient well. "I don't know who it is, but she said, if one day I meet someone who recognizes it, I'll understand." Chris felt the air around him suddenly thicken. He had once given that very ring to Lily, the girl with big, innocent eyes who always clung to him when he visited Sunshine Children's Home, despite his father's quiet opposition. It was the Reynolds family's matching pair of rings, custom-made for his mother's twin daughters, one of which still lay in Olivia Reynolds' jewelry box. The other he had stolen in a fit of anger with his father, and given to Lily as a secret vow. "When you see this ring, you'll know I'm coming back. I promise." And then he never returned. Chris lowered his head, torn inside. In that moment, The image of his father, Richard Reynolds, flashed in his mind, the most powerful man in New York, the one who manipulated the entire real estate industry like a chessboard, and the man who had hidden Lily's existence from all records, making her disappear as if she had never existed. Chris recalled an old document he had once glimpsed in his father's office, marked in red with scrawled handwriting. LS-15, special case, no trace, forward assets. Now, Chris understood. LS was shorthand for Lily Sullivan, her birth name before she was adopted and renamed Amara Collins. He suddenly found it hard to breathe, as if each fragment of the memory was choking him. Looking at Amara, he had no doubt anymore. This girl was the child his father had hidden, the child he had once promised to protect, and he had broken that promise. Chris sank back into the seat behind the wheel, trying to steady his breath, but Amara's gaze still lingered on him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. Chris forced a smile, the first time allowing himself to drop the facade of success. "Not really, but thank you for helping me with the car and with everything else." They drove toward the town in silence. Chris couldn't tear his eyes away from the ring on Amara's hand, the fading sunlight reflecting off the ruby stone. He began to form a series of questions. Why had Richard allowed her to survive? Why had Sarah Collins, Amara's adoptive mother, disappeared without anyone being able to track her? And most importantly, what had Richard hidden? When the car stopped in front of an old apartment complex on the edge of town, Amara turned to him. "I can get off here, thank you, sir." Chris hesitated for a moment and then said, "Amara, if you find anything more about your mother, about the person who gave you that ring, I could help you understand more." Amara's gaze narrowed slightly. For a moment, it was as if she were weighing the instincts of someone who had lived in hardship against the budding trust she had just started to feel. "I'll think about it," she replied. Then, gently, she closed the car door. Chris watched as her figure disappeared behind the rusty gate. He knew their journey had just begun, and he had a strong feeling, if the ring had returned, then his father would certainly find out soon. And when Richard Reynolds knew, everyone connected to that secret would be in grave danger. Chris sat motionless behind the wheel, his mind trapped between two timelines. The ruby ring, a symbol of a childhood promise he thought had been buried, now appeared on the finger of a black girl he had never met, but who evoked a deep, haunting memory he had long avoided. Lily. He swallowed hard, his palm sweating. Amara's gaze, serious, profound, yet still carrying a touch of innocence, made it impossible for him to lie to himself any longer. "Amara," Chris called, as she turned to walk into the apartment complex. "Did your mother ever work as a nurse? Did she work at a place called Sunshine Children's Home?" Amara turned back, surprised. "I've heard my mom mention it a few times. I think it was called Sunshine. My mom's name was Sarah Collins. She said that place was the reason she had to leave New York." Sarah Collins. The name struck Chris like a knife to his memory. He mumbled, almost losing control. It can't be that coincidental. 15 years ago, he'd been just a 19-year-old teenager, struggling against the control of his father, Richard Reynolds, a notorious real estate mogul with a cold, calculating and tyrannical lifestyle. Chris couldn't accept that his family manipulated everything for business gain. And during a visit with his mother, Olivia Reynolds, to Sunshine Children's Home, he met Lily, a 5-year-old girl with eyes as sorrowful as if she had lost the entire world. They became friends. Chris brought her toys, taught her how to read. Then one day, he secretly brought the ruby ring. one of the two family heirloom rings intricately carved with the Reynolds family emblem. He gave it to Lily, swearing, "I'll come back. When you see this ring, you'll know it's me." But Chris never came back. Sunshine Children's Home suddenly shut down a few weeks later without warning. No one knew where the children were taken. The records were destroyed, and his father, Richard Reynolds, was the one who bought the land to build the first commercial complex of the Reynolds Corporation. Chris had looked into it, but all doors slammed shut. His mother remained strangely silent. Whenever he mentioned Lily, she would only say, "It's over now, you have to let the past sleep." But now, the ring had returned, on the hand of a girl named Amara Collins, with an adoptive mother who had worked as a nurse at Sunshine. And more than anything, it was Amara's eyes, the quiet strength in her sorrow, that made Chris's heart tighten. It wasn't a coincidence. This was destiny. He quietly asked, trying not to tremble, "Amara, do you know why your mother left Sunshine?" Amara lowered her head, her voice softening. "I heard my mom mention it once, when she didn't know I was listening. She said there was something wrong at that place, that she had to take me away, that if she hadn't done that, I might not be here." Chris closed his eyes. The fragments of memory shattered in his mind, piecing together into a terrible picture. Richard Reynolds had organized special child transfers from Sunshine for unclear purposes, which, to this day, he had only seen in scattered notes like forward assets or test case. He opened his wallet and pulled out a business card, quickly writing on the back, "If you or Uncle Matthew, your guardian, find anything from your mother about Sunshine, please call me. This is my personal number." Amara took it, hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Okay." Chris slowly drove away, but in the rearview mirror, he saw Amara standing by the gate, clutching the business card tightly, as if holding on to a secret she didn't fully understand yet. That night, in the penthouse on the 52nd floor of the Reynolds Tower, Chris rummaged through the wooden box his mother had hidden behind a painting in her bedroom, a box containing things no one was meant to know. Inside, he found a torn, old Polaroid photo, a picture of him holding Lily's hand in the playground of Sunshine. Chris placed the photo next to a stack of old files, the only document he had ever stolen from his father's office related to Sunshine. It was a list of children, each name accompanied by notes, special abilities, not suitable, high potential, and one name, circled in red, Lily Sullivan, special priority. Phase 2. Transfer, do not trace. Chris closed his eyes, gripping the photo tightly. If Amara really was Lily, then she had once been the center of a conspiracy that he still didn't fully understand. And if so, he knew one thing. Richard Reynolds wouldn't rest if he found out the girl was alive. Chris sat alone in the glass office on the 52nd floor, the lights of Manhattan casting cold streaks across his face. He didn't open his laptop like usual, nor did he answer the calls from the Reynolds Development Executive Team. Instead, his hands were turning through an old file, yellowed pages, but Richard Reynolds' signature still as sharp as ever. "All leads have been handled." Those words haunted Chris more than any financial report he had ever reviewed. In a separate note, it read, "Lily Sullivan, special handling. Maintain as contingency plan for Case C. No trace left." Below that was a copy of the decision to shut down Sunshine Children's Home, signed just 3 days after Chris's last visit to the orphanage that year. Along with it were a series of documents marked in red: personnel asset transfer completed, sealed files, no outside access except RR. Chris leaned back in his chair, feeling as if the world was tilting. Throughout his business career, he had suspected his father's lack of morality, seen him manipulate finances, and heard rumors about silent buyouts. But for the first time, he realized the true nature of Richard Reynolds, not just a tycoon, but someone who manipulated human lives like commodities. And Lily, or Amara, was part of that plan. A contingency. The phone rang, the screen showing Olivia Reynolds' name. Chris hesitated for a moment before answering. "You're getting too close to the truth for comfort," his mother began, her voice raw, as if tired. "Do you know about this?" Chris asked, his voice firm as gravel. "I know, but not enough to stop him. When I found out Sunshine had been shut down, I asked. Richard simply said, 'Everything is in my hands. Don't interfere,' and I, foolishly, believed him. Do you know about Lily? I knew you had feelings for her, knew about the ring you gave her, but I thought she was gone, like so many other children. Until today," Olivia's voice choked. "Is she alive?" Chris whispered, as if speaking to himself. "Not just alive, she's strong, smart, and the girl fixed my Mustang on a dirt road with some tape and courage." There was silence on the other end. Then Olivia spoke softly. "Richard won't let it go if he finds out. He buried an entire chapter of history just to hide that truth." Chris nodded, his eyes flicking over the Polaroid photo on his desk. A picture of him holding little Lily's hand years ago. Then maybe it's time to dig it up. The next morning, Chris went to the classified storage room of Reynolds Development Group, the place where his father kept the most secretive documents. With high-level access, he used his fingerprint to unlock the thick steel door, stepping into the cold, tomb-like space that held decades of the company's secrets. Hundreds of files were neatly stacked on the shelves, but Chris only needed to find one. Sunshine Acquisition. Confidential. Internal use only. RR eyes only. He opened the file, his heart pounding. List of children categorized. Suitable. Not suitable. Transfer. Pending medical checks. Adoption applications denied for internal priority purposes. A black and white photo, Sarah Collins. Head nurse record, note, suspicious. Monitor. And at the bottom, a secret diagram. Genesis Project, Genetic Contingency/Inheritance/Generation Transfer Plan. Chris gasped for air. This wasn't just about his father closing an orphanage. This was an entire experimental program where children were selected like merchandise, placed into a control process to serve Richard Reynolds' vision of an immortal legacy. The girl Amara, who had helped him on the road with kindness and greasy hands, was at the center of this scheme. And Chris understood more than anyone else. The first crack had appeared in the Reynolds empire. But to bring it all down, he would have to face his father directly. He took photos of the entire file with his phone, carefully stored the memory card in a small box, and then closed the storage room door, like sealing a coffin. As he left the building, Chris didn't look back, but deep down, he knew. This battle would be about more than loss. It would be about survival. A light rain fell on the cold, wet steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Chris sat in a narrow corner near the confessional, his hands tightly clasped together, his head bowed as if he were holding a storm inside. Shortly after, Olivia Reynolds entered, her slender frame draped in a charcoal coat, sunglasses obscuring most of her face. She wasn't the radiant woman often seen on the covers of financial magazines. In that moment, she was simply a mother trembling with memories. Chris looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "I've found Lily." Olivia froze, then suddenly sat down beside her son. She removed her glasses, revealing red, swollen eyes. Moments later, tears began to fall, uncontrollable. Her body shook as if a part of the past, sealed for 15 years, was rushing back. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "She's wearing your ruby ring," Chris answered, his voice growing steadier. "Lily is alive. Her name now is Amara Collins, and her adoptive mother, Sarah, was the head nurse at Sunshine." Olivia cupped her face in her hands, trying to hold back a sob that threatened to burst free. After a long pause, she whispered, "She's not just Lily. She's one of two." Chris furrowed his brow. His heart tightened unexpectedly. "Two? Don't you know?" Olivia turned to look at her son, her voice trembling like a breeze. "You have two twin sisters. When I gave birth, one of them, according to Richard, died at birth. He had me sign the death certificate while I was still unconscious from the drugs. And the other one?" Chris couldn't finish the sentence. "Lily," Olivia nodded. "I didn't know where Richard took her. He just said, 'Don't worry. The other one will be useful later if your son doesn't stay on track.'" A deathly silence swept between them. Chris's voice caught in his throat. All the accusations he had ever leveled at his father now seemed to cross a new boundary. It wasn't just manipulation of assets. It wasn't just ruthlessness toward rivals. It was stealing his own flesh and blood to turn her into a substitute for his rightful heir. "When did you know?" Chris asked. Olivia lowered her head. "I suspected when Sunshine closed. I investigated secretly, but all the records were wiped clean. When I confronted him, Richard bluntly said, 'If you want to keep your precious son, forget about that girl.'" Chris clenched his fists. His nails dug into his skin until blood began to surface without him realizing. "She's your sister," Olivia whispered, "and you're the only one who can bring her back." Chris nodded slowly, as if making a silent vow, but then his gaze turned cold. "What about the other one? If Lily's alive, then Elizabeth—" "Richard said she died, but now I don't believe a word that comes out of his mouth." Chris stood up suddenly, his gaze distant, looking through the stained glass of the cathedral, where the sunset light was slowly fading. If he lied about one child, then he could have buried an entire other life. "Chris!" Olivia called, worried. "What are you going to do?" He turned to her, his eyes no longer those of a son of the Reynolds family. They were the eyes of an older brother, a son, a man stepping out from the enormous shadow of Richard Reynolds. "I'm going to find Elizabeth. I'll protect Lily, and I'll bring down this empire built on blood and lies." Olivia gripped her son's hand tightly, her lips pressed together, as if witnessing the final part of a nightmare slowly shifting into the dawn. Outside, the church bells rang out amid the sound of falling rain, a cleansing sound for a declaration of war, with the truth being the first sword to be drawn. In the small attic room bathed in the glow of the late afternoon sun, Amara Collins sat on the floor, the old brown leather journal of her adoptive mother, Sarah Collins, open before her. The slanted handwriting, hurried and uneven, still bore traces of tears that had faded with time, but the contents were like a knife cutting straight into the heart of the 14-year-old girl. "I can't believe it. He really did this," Amara whispered, the words choking in her throat. As she turned to the last page of the journal, Amara discovered something Sarah had never shared with her. A small piece of cloth taped to the back cover. Her hands trembled as she peeled it away, a thin steel key affixed to the leather. And then, the ruby ring on her finger, the final treasure her mother had left her, gave a soft click as Amara accidentally twisted it. The ring opened. Inside was a tiny compartment containing a round, clear plastic object, microfilm. Amara froze, then jumped to her feet, running down the stairs like the wind. She knew who she had to find. That evening, in the old mechanic's workshop where Uncle Matthew worked, the two of them leaned over an old microfilm reader. The screen showed blurry images at first, gradually sharpening, detailed records of a top-secret plan called Project Gemini. The headline appeared, Human Resources Strategy, Reynolds Development Group. Plan, Twins, Code, Gemini. Status, Absolute Confidentiality. Matthew couldn't tear his eyes away from the list displayed on the screen. Lily Sullivan, Special Handling, placed at Sunshine. Elizabeth Sullivan, Status, Processed, Deceased. Sarah Collins, Leak Risk, Tight Surveillance, marked Uncooperative. Daniel Collins, Neutralized, Confirmation of $50,000 payment. Amara froze. Daniel, she whispered. He was Sarah's brother. He used to be a medic. Mom said he died in a car accident. But, Matthew clenched his jaw, his eyes reddening. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution. He spoke in a low, dark tone. Sarah always suspected. Daniel secretly investigated Sunshine after he saw records of children transferred without proper documentation. He never came back after his last trip to the city land office. Amara silently touched the screen where the word neutralized was listed next to Daniel's name. Her small hand clenched the ring, something that was not just a memento, but now the key to unlocking the bloody truth that had been hidden for over a decade. Matthew leaned back in his chair, hands over his head, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah didn't just save you, Amara. She risked everything to fight against an empire, and now they won't stop. I know, Amara said, her gaze shining with an unusual maturity. I won't let everything be buried in silence again. On the other side of the city, in his penthouse, Chris was going over files from Richard's office. A new image had just been sent from the private investigator he hired. A photo of a hospital registry from 2011. Patient name, Elizabeth Reynolds. Condition, newborn. Notes, special transfer, per RR's order. Chris felt his blood run cold. Elizabeth is alive. The chill running down his spine wasn't just from the secret now revealed, but because it meant if Richard still needed Elizabeth for some special purpose, he wouldn't let anyone, not Chris, not Amara, get close to the truth. And if Amara truly was Lily, then the hunt had begun. At Amara's house, at that very moment, Matthew received an anonymous text message. Withdraw. Don't look any further. Losing anyone else is your fault. Attached was a distant photo of Amara on her way to school. Matthew stood up abruptly, his eyes bloodshot. They know. They're watching us. Amara looked at her uncle, her gaze unwavering. They want me to be afraid, but I won't be. Not when I know someone died protecting me. I'll keep going. For my mother, for Uncle Daniel, for Elizabeth, if she's still alive. She turned to look at the ruby ring, which glimmered under the desk lamp. And for the truth they've been trying to bury for 15 years. The microfilm revealed a secret far greater than what the two of them had imagined. The names, the amounts, the schemes, all encoded in a cruel plan called Project Gemini. And now, the path to the truth wasn't just a personal journey. It was a life-or-death confrontation with a man willing to kill to protect his empire. The atmosphere in the penthouse apartment suddenly grew cold, as if someone had just opened the door to a past that had been sealed away. On Chris's phone screen, a message from Victoria Huntington, his soon-to-be fiancée, appeared, the words sharp as knives. Richard knows. He's been watching your sister for a long time. Don't trust anyone on the board. Chris tightened his grip on the phone, his eyes fixed on the message. His heart raced. Victoria, the woman who had stood by his side through countless public events, held his hand during the billion-dollar project announcement and said yes in front of the media. That woman was now the first to warn him. He couldn't let this continue in the shadows. Chris called her to meet privately at the apartment late at night. Victoria walked in wearing an elegant business suit, but her usual cold demeanor was gone, replaced by inner turmoil. "Why?" Chris asked, without any preamble. "Why did you send that message?" Victoria didn't respond immediately. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a leather-bound book and opened it to the middle. Inside was a faded birth certificate aged with time. Name: Elizabeth Sullivan. Date of birth: May 2nd. Parents: not listed. Notes: special care, per Reynolds' order. Chris slumped back in his chair as if struck. "It can't be," his voice faltered. Victoria looked at him, for the first time with eyes no longer playing a part. "I am Elizabeth. I'm Lily's twin sister, or rather, Amara's." The air grew thick, heavy, like lead. Chris could hardly breathe. Victoria continued, "They didn't kill me. They turned me into property. The Huntington family is a side branch of Reynolds, specializing in raising children like me. Replacement heirs in case the true heir betrays them." Chris stared at the woman before him. All the cold behavior, the indifferent attachment, and the times she refused to talk about her past. All of it now made sense. "So, you're a spy? A plant placed next to me by Richard?" Victoria closed her eyes. She pulled a small memory card and a stack of photographs from her jacket pocket. "At first, yes. I was trained to control you, but after meeting meeting Lily, I began to remember fragments of my past. The lullabies, the scent of Mom's clothes, the birthmark in the shape of a musical note on the back of my neck, just like Amara has." She pulled her collar down, revealing the identical mark. Chris couldn't speak. Victoria continued, her voice now deep and resolute. "I've lived my whole life as a pawn, but I've turned against that chessboard. I can't let Richard destroy anyone else." "So, what's on this memory card?" "The board members of Reynolds Group, including politicians, businessmen, and even the doctors in the hospital who falsified my death records. But to release it, you need proof that Amara is Lily, and I am Elizabeth." Chris gritted his teeth. The blood in his veins boiled, not just out of anger, but because of the betrayal he felt, from his father, from the empire he once thought symbolized success. "We need a DNA test," he said, "and we need a way to make Richard expose himself." Victoria nodded. "I'll help, but not from the outside. I'll go back to Richard and make him think I'm still on his side." Chris looked deep into her eyes. "Are you sure? If he suspects, you won't leave that place alive." Victoria pressed her lips together, her gaze as cold as steel, not out of hatred, but because she had spent her life in a fake gilded cage, and now it was time to burn it to ash. "If I have to die, I choose to die as myself." Meanwhile, at his mountain villa in the Catskills, Richard Reynolds stood before a city planning map for the new development, with a man wearing dark sunglasses, codenamed Drake, in charge of handling leaks. "We need to clean this up," Richard said coldly. "That girl, Amara, find her and verify her bloodline. If it's true, she can't be allowed to exist." Drake bowed his head, speaking. "I've sent people to her school. Plan A starts next week. She'll be set up. We'll leave traces of rebellion and then a school accident." Richard smirked. "And Elizabeth?" "Still under control. She won't dare to turn on us." Richard turned toward the window, looking down at the city bathed in golden light. No one is going to break this empire, not even my own blood. Darkness was tightening around Amara, but right in the middle of these ruthless schemes, the two twin sisters thought to be forever separated were quietly standing side by side, preparing a counterattack that Richard never saw coming. The flash of hundreds of cameras kept flashing like fireworks, the stage lights shining every second during the grand announcement of the Sunshine Plaza project, a mega city that the Reynolds Group expected to become their new legacy. In his black suit, neatly combed hair, eyes steely as ever, Chris Reynolds stepped into the center of the hall. The front rows were filled with high-profile figures, the mayor of New York, representatives from the central bank, venture capitalists, and none other than Richard Reynolds, the father Chris had once idolized, sitting in the VIP section, arms crossed as if the whole world was following the script he had written. But today, Chris wasn't playing along anymore. He stared directly into the camera lens broadcasting live, his voice deep and slow. I am Christopher Reynolds, the rightful heir to this corporation, and I have an urgent statement unrelated to the Sunshine Plaza project. A wave of shock rippled across the hall. Richard raised an eyebrow, but Chris didn't stop. 15 years ago, there was a facility called Sunshine Children's Shelter. Officially, it was an orphanage, but in reality, it was a genetic experiment camp where children were raised as substitute options to serve powerful bloodlines in case the legitimate heir failed. A few people chuckled dismissively, but then the giant LED screen behind Chris lit up. Faded old images, red-stamped documents, and leaked footage appeared one by one. A list of children with identification numbers, surveillance footage of the children undergoing psychological experiments, records with the title Lily Sullivan, Subject 0247B, genetic match 98% with CR. The room froze. Chris raised a stack of printed color documents, his voice stronger now. I am the first product, a child programmed from birth to become the perfect heir. But I am not alone. There's another, the one who was hidden away as a backup. The stage wings opened. Amara stepped out, dressed in a neat school uniform. She held Victoria's hand tightly, and on each of their ring fingers was an identical red ruby ring. The room gasped. Richard stood up instinctively, his eyes wide. Chris pointed to the two girls. This is Lily Sullivan, known now as Amara Collins, and this is Elizabeth Sullivan, once known as Victoria Huntington. The two of them are twin sisters, stolen from their mother's arms to serve a plan my father orchestrated before they were even born. The scene erupted into chaos. Some delegates pulled out their earpieces. The camera crews turned their lenses toward Richard, who was pale, struggling to maintain composure. Olivia Reynolds, the mother who had been silenced for years, stepped onto the podium. Her voice cracked, but firm. I lost 2 children. One I thought was dead. I stayed silent because I was threatened, but today I choose to stand up. Sarah Collins, Amara's adoptive mother, stepped up behind Olivia. She held a faded photograph of the twin girls as newborns, along with Daniel's suicide letter, her brother, who had been killed after investigating Sunshine. My brother died for speaking the truth. Today I live to tell the rest of it. The entire room stood still. Chris didn't blink. He looked straight at his father, Richard, who had now retreated to the back of the stage, face red, throat twitching. You've always thought of yourself as God, with the right to create and erase lives to protect your empire of wealth. But this time, you won't erase anything anymore. Chris pulled out the DNA test results in front of the entire press, revealing the genetic match between him, Amara, and Victoria, all confirming their blood relationship. Richard's hand clenched, but nothing could stop the truth from spreading to millions through the live broadcast. Chris turned back to the audience, his voice now calm and steady. Sunshine Plaza will not be built on blood and lies. From today, I reject all privileges inherited from Richard Reynolds. I will transfer the assets to a community fund, in the name of my sister, the Lilly Foundation, to support children abused by systems like Sunshine. The first applause rang out, from an elderly woman sitting in the back row. Then it spread. The entire hall erupted. But in the midst of the cheers, the camera unknowingly caught Richard, pulling out his phone and leaving the hall silently, like a ghost. A public battle had just ended, but the silent counterattack, where Richard would not let himself fall easily, had just officially begun. Less than 48 hours after the explosive press conference at the Sunshine Plaza project launch, Richard Reynolds, once the symbol of financial power, was surrounded and arrested by the FBI at the Reynolds family estate on Long Island. The iron gates, once reserved for those with power and noble bloodlines, were now wide open for the SUV convoy bearing the FBI insignia, with red and blue lights flashing off the mansion's frosted glass windows. Inside, Richard sat at the breakfast table, still in his gray silk pajamas, holding an espresso cup as if the world still operated on his command. But the sound of heavy footsteps on the marble floor grew closer. When the lead agent read the arrest warrant, Richard didn't resist. He burst into maniacal laughter, bitter and mocking. "You think you've just done something great," he yelled as he was handcuffed, his laughter mingled with venom. "None of you exist without me. Every single one of you is just a product in my game. Amara, Victoria, Chris, they're all just experiments." The scene was filmed and broadcasted across national news. The entire country witnessed one of the richest fathers in America being dragged away in his pajamas, ranting about power, genetics, and absolute control. Meanwhile, at the federal prosecutor's office, Victoria, now having abandoned the Huntington identity to use her true name, Elizabeth Sullivan, personally handed over a USB drive containing all the classified information about Gemini, the project Richard had funded with hundreds of millions of dollars through shell companies in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. On the USB were thousands of internal emails related to Sunshine Shelter, child screening operations, genetic research funding contracts for unnamed universities, a list of over 30 politicians, officials, and doctors receiving donations in exchange for silence. The name Gemini, inspired by the symbol of the twins, represented the perfect pair, one to publicly inherit, the other to control in the shadows. At the FBI headquarters in Manhattan, Chris, Amara, and Olivia sat together. On the screen was the Reynolds Corporation's power structure chart, now collapsing like a domino tower. Branches were being systematically frozen. International partners began fleeing. Stocks were plummeting uncontrollably. Boards of directors resigned. That evening, in a small conference room on the hotel's top floor, Amara opened the ruby ring box one last time. The light reflected off the stone, making the gem appear to burn. But she saw nothing but the captivity it once represented, a link to the past, a past of fear, loss, and being treated as a genetic backup. She slowly removed the ring from her finger and gently placed it on the glass table. "I don't need it anymore," Amara said softly, her voice neither angry nor pained, just a quiet release. Chris looked at her. He understood. In that moment, she was no longer anyone's product. Not a plan B, not an experiment. She was a person writing her own fate. At that moment, Olivia entered the room, holding an envelope. "The FBI just found this in Richard's secret safe," she said. It's his personal journal and a video. It seems there may be a fourth person involved." No one spoke, but the air grew heavier. A fourth person? Chris looked at Amara. Amara looked at Victoria, and the three of them understood. This battle was not over. They had only scratched the surface of the iceberg. In a gentle morning in the Catskill Mountains, the sound of roosters crowing echoed between the rows of chestnut trees, and sunlight filtered through the thin mist. Amara Collins stepped out onto the porch, a hot cup of cocoa in her hands. The view before her was no longer the cold skyscrapers of Manhattan, but a small farm where she felt peace for the first time in her life. Inside, Chris, now Chris Collins, was preparing breakfast, wearing a flannel shirt, his hair no longer slicked back as it once was. He had officially changed his last name, discarding Reynolds, a name that once symbolized empire and ambition, to honor Sarah Collins, the mother who had sacrificed her youth to raise Amara. They were no longer a blood family, but a family chosen by love, gratitude, and forgiveness. In the nearby wooden house, Sarah sat with Olivia, the two women who had once stood on opposite sides of a genetic war. But now they were together signing the final draft of the Sunshine Memorial Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping abandoned and abused children in the foster system, especially victims of covert medical oversight programs like the one Sunshine Shelter had once been manipulated by Richard. Victoria, or rather Elizabeth, was the legal director. She had once been a tool of that system, but now she was the one breaking it from the inside. And Matthew, the humble mechanic from years ago, had been appointed as the director of technical training for the vocational centers established by the foundation. He was the first to believe in Amara's abilities when society had looked down on her small, oil-covered hands. The first headquarters of the Sunshine Memorial Foundation was inaugurated right where the Sunshine Children's Shelter had once stood. No more rusted iron fences. No more private property signs. Now, it was an open campus with an outdoor learning garden, technical workshops, an emotional library, and dormitories for children escaping abusive systems. On that day's ceremony, Amara was the first to speak. Her voice was steady and strong, no longer trembling as it had when standing beside Chris on the side of the road. "I am not a victim of a genetic conspiracy. I am proof that love can surpass blood. Family is not where you're born. It's where you choose to stay, where they protect you, and where you heal together." The crowd erupted in applause. Many people were in tears. Chris quietly squeezed Olivia's hand. Sarah, sitting in the front row, cried silently, but it wasn't tears of sorrow. It was the tears of a mother witnessing what she had protected blossom into something beautiful. That evening, as the family gathered around the wood stove, Victoria asked the question that no one had dared mention for a week. "So, what about the video that wasn't opened in Richard's will?" No one answered immediately. Chris slowly stood up, taking a black USB drive from the safe, the very one the FBI had returned from Richard's secret vault, along with a note that read, "Not everything is your father's fault." He plugged the USB into the laptop. The screen lit up. A blurry, shaky video appeared, seemingly recorded by Richard himself in a state of delirium. "If you're watching this, Chris, then I'm no longer here, and maybe you've found them. Both of them, 3 of you, or 4. Amara's heart stopped. She turned to look at Victoria. Victoria furrowed her brow. 3 of you. Richard continued. "There will be a time when you think I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But don't let yourself fall for the hero's role, Chris. No one builds an empire with empty hands. There's one more. A witness." The image cut off. The screen turned black. Chris clenched his fist. Victoria stepped back. Amara then asked a single question, her voice soft, yet it echoed through the silence like thunder. "If there's one more, where are they?" The early morning sun filtered through the yellowing maples at the start of autumn, casting light on the red brick facade of the new Sunshine Community Center. Once a cursed land, cloaked in the guise of a luxury plaza. Now, there were no more bleach smells or surveillance cameras, but instead the sound of children's laughter, the hum of sewing machines, and the notes of an old piano played by hands once deemed without a future. Amara Lily Collins, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, walked up to the makeshift stage built from recycled wooden frames. She didn't need a microphone. Her clear voice, unwavering gaze, and poise at just 15 years old made the hundreds of people in the audience, from reporters and politicians to orphaned children, fall silent. "My name is Amara Lily Collins," she said, "and today I am not here to tell the story of what has been taken from me. I am here to say I have chosen what I will take." She paused, pulling out a piece of old paper from her jacket. A page from Sarah's diary, the part that had been partially burned but carefully restored by Uncle Matthew. "My mother once wrote, 'Family is not blood. Family is the ones who choose to love you when the whole world turns its back on you.'" Amara lifted her head, her voice steadier. "And I have found that family, not by birth, not by genetics, not by those in power, but by those who choose to protect me with their hearts." Below, Chris Collins nodded, holding tightly to his mother Olivia's hand and his sister Elizabeth, now fully abandoning the identity of Victoria Huntington, working as a program advisor at the center. Sarah sat beside them, tears streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow, but the tears of a mother witnessing the fruit of a love that had been unconditional. Sunshine Community Center was a miracle. Built from administrative fines and assets seized from the Reynolds Empire, it was home to Matthew's Garage, a car repair training room where children learned trades from Uncle. Matthew, the man who once saved Amara's mother from a kidnapping years ago. Sarah's corner library, preserving all records on the foster care system, including the files that had been hidden for decades. Olivia Haven Therapy Room, providing free psychological services for children who had been abused or abandoned. And a special wall, the wall of chosen family, where anyone could write the names of those who had chosen to love them as family. After the speech, Amara stepped down from the stage as the crowd erupted into applause, but she turned back inside, where she spotted a young black boy, around 8 years old, standing shyly behind a pillar, still wearing his identification tag from the shelter. She knelt down, extending her hand. "What's your name?" "Zeke," the boy whispered. "Zeke," Amara smiled. "Do you know that you are worth more than all the things people have ever said about you?" The boy nodded slightly. She gently removed her founding member badge from her jacket and pinned it to his shirt. "Because today you begin writing your own story." In another corner, Olivia received an anonymous package. Inside was a partially burned photo showing 3 children in a hospital years ago, and on the back of the photo, in faded brown ink, were the words, "Gemini is not just 2. The 3rd is still waiting to be called." No one spoke, but the eyes of all present were directed toward the horizon, where a new truth was slowly beginning to emerge behind the curtain of old guilt. The sunset light filtered through the large glass window of the Sunshine Community Center, casting shadows across the oak display cabinet placed in the center of the hall. Inside, among the artifacts that had once revealed the horrifying secrets of the Reynolds Empire, lay an old ruby ring, quietly resting in a black velvet tray, its deep red hue gleaming like dried bloodstains. Amara stood still, staring at the ring. In her hand was a small silver ring, handcrafted, without gemstones or intricate designs, but it radiated a value she had never had before, the power of choice. Chris stood beside her, handing her the ring, his eyes reflecting the peace he had spent half his life reaching. "This isn't to mark ownership," he said softly. "It's to remind us that true love doesn't need to be bound by fear." Not just Amara, but Olivia, Sarah, Victoria, and Uncle Matthew. All of them wore identical silver rings. They weren't blood relatives, they weren't products of the Gemini Project. Nor were they pawns manipulated by Richard's will. They were a family reborn through trust and the will to be free. Amara took a deep breath, unlocked the glass cabinet, and gently placed the ruby ring inside, next to the microfilm and a torn page from Sarah's diary. The small sign in front of the display read, "Relics of the past, not to honor the pain, but to remember. We were once controlled, and we learned how to break free from it." After the ceremony, the whole family returned to their small farm in the Catskills. There were no crystal chandeliers or million-dollar banquet tables. Only the warm glow from the fireplace, the scent of freshly baked cookies in the kitchen, and Matthew's acoustic guitar playing from the porch. Amara sat next to Victoria, who had now become a close sister, no longer Richard's accomplice. They didn't speak much, but when Victoria gently squeezed Amara's hand, their glance was enough to convey that they were no longer two parts of an experiment, but two souls who had survived, rebuilding the world together. Chris, Olivia, and Sarah sat in the living room, discussing plans to expand the Sunshine Foundation into other states. Their new project, Silver Promise Initiative, would seek out and support young people who had been exploited by state-run and private foster care programs. That evening, Amara opened her email, checking messages from the children who had once lived at Sunshine. One unfamiliar name caught her eye. From Elijah Gray. Subject: I am the third. Amara paused. She opened the message. "I never knew who I was until I saw your speech today. Your face, the way you spoke, your eyes, everything is just like the person in the photo I've kept since I was 8 years old. I also have a ring, but it's silver, engraved with 3 letters, L-E-V. Are you ready to hear the rest of the truth, Amara?" Amara closed her laptop, silently gazing out the window at the night sky. The wind gently stirred the curtain. Out there, an unfinished story was knocking on the door. A new journey was about to begin. Family was no longer a place to return to. It was where you chose to go together. The Millbrook High School courtyard echoed with loud applause. The American flag fluttered in the early summer sunlight. On the makeshift wooden stage, Amara Lily Collins, 15, walked up to receive her early graduation diploma, dressed in a simple white dress, and her curly hair styled into an elegant bun, exuding confidence. She was a far cry from the quiet girl who had walked the rural road just a year ago. Today, Amara stood before hundreds of eyes, not to be pitied, but to be admired. In the front row, Chris, Olivia, Sarah, Victoria, and Uncle Matthew sat close together, each wearing a silver ring that sparkled in the sunlight, a symbol of a promise kept. On the large screen set up behind the stage, a video fast-forwarded through Amara's journey. A shot of her kneeling by the Mustang GT on the side of the road. Chris's stunned expression as he saw the ruby ring. The scene of Sunshine Plaza being sealed off by the FBI, with Richard Reynolds being handcuffed and escorted through a rain of media flashes. The ruby ring displayed in a glass case at the Sunshine Community Center. A voiceover echoed, "1 year ago, no one knew the name Amara Collins. Today, the entire nation is grateful for her. She reminded us that no power is greater than kindness, and no secret can survive in the light." Richard Reynolds, now 71, sat in a federal detention center in Virginia, stripped of all titles and assets. His trial, with charges of child identity trafficking, international money laundering, illegal genetic experimentation, and child abuse, was dubbed the trial of the century. He was once rumored to be untouchable, but his empire crumbled thanks to a young black girl who dared to stop and help others. Amara approached the podium, holding the microphone in hands that once held tape and car repair tools, her voice steady and firm. "I am not here as a genius, a lost product, or a symbol of triumph. I am just a child who wasn't chosen, but I chose to step into the light." She paused for a few seconds, her eyes scanning familiar faces. "And that light doesn't come from genetics, status, or money. It comes from those who loved me unconditionally. From my adoptive mother, who gave me a ring and a way out. From those who dared speak the truth, even at a cost. We don't need to be Reynolds or Huntington or any other powerful name. We just need to be ourselves, and never back down when what's right is called wrong." After her speech, a representative from the U.S. Department of Education presented Amara with a full scholarship to Columbia University's engineering program. No longer was she seen as just a lucky child, but as a future leader, someone who could redefine power, ethics, and justice. At the same time, at the Sunshine Foundation, hundreds of letters continued to flood in every day. From children who had once lived in the foster system, from adults who had been cast aside, from journalists, activists, and even those who had once worked for Richard, now choosing to stand for the truth. As the ceremony concluded, Chris gently placed his arm around Amara. He whispered, "You've brought down an empire." Amara smiled, her eyes bright yet resolute. "I didn't try to bring it down. I just stopped to fix a car. 1 year, 1 girl, 1 ring." But what truly changed the world wasn't in the material, but in the choice to step out of the shadow of the past. From a black girl disregarded on the side of the road to a beacon of hope for thousands of forgotten children, Amara Lily Collins proved, you don't need to be born in the spotlight to become the light. What do you think? Can one small act of kindness really bring down a whole empire of lies? If this story touched you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring journeys where justice always finds its way back to the light. Don't forget to leave a comment. What would you do if you saw someone struggling by the road?